Okay, I'm coming to you from Swanchalaga, which is Joanne Sweeney's house. Um, and I am with you on, it is 9:40 at night, and I'm taping this video for you because it's that point of the pandemic. And I'm sure you are all feeling the same things I am feeling. So I wanted to put together a small video for you on families and the state. And there are three main topics we're going to talk about, actually, kind of four. How Child Protective Services, or the Department of Child Services, it goes by various names in various states, operates. Termination of parental rights, domestic violence situations, and a little bit about adoption. It's unlikely that you're going to see a whole lot of this on the final exam, but you may see it in a bar question. And it's important and it's interesting. So we're going to start. I don't have my fancy IKEA whiteboard easel with me today, but we'll get through as best we can. Child Protective Services, or the Department of Child Services. It goes by different names in different states. They are an administrative agency set up by the states. Every state has an agency, and their purpose is to protect children. The problem, or one of the issues that you have to understand, is that people frequently misunderstand the interplay between DCS or CPS, the police, and the civil justice system. You need to understand that those are three separate agencies, or three separate areas of the law. And the police only cover what's criminal. They may respond to a family situation and very frequently say, that's a civil matter, you'll have to take it to court. DCS, what DCS or CPS does, bridges both civil law and criminal law. So sometimes they work with the police, sometimes they don't. It depends. What CPS is involved in is the civil interdiction of child abuse. And that is a different proposition than the criminal interdiction of child abuse. They are two separate things. So if you think about an assault, if you get assaulted, you get battered, you can file charges, or you can file a lawsuit. Those are two different remedies that you have. You have them simultaneously. Different rules apply to them, different standards apply to them. It's the exact same thing with child abuse. It may be a crime, or it may be a CPS investigation, or it might be both. So the police, when they investigate child abuse, they are bound by the criminal law and only the criminal law, nothing else. As you can imagine, there are situations where the government should or does get involved that fall short of criminal activity. So if you've got a parent who makes bad decisions, but it doesn't rise to the level of a criminal matter, CPS would get involved, but the police would not. If it is neglect or abuse to the criminal level, then both agencies will get involved. And one of the big issues with CPS or DCS is that they are bound by two sets of law, administrative law and the state code. They are supposed to be trained in both. But what typically happens is that your average DCS, CPS caseworker is entirely overloaded, and they are trained with a policy manual. And depending on how well that policy manual is written, it may or may not include all of the appropriate things that it should include. So I want to give you an example from my time as a family lawyer in a DCS hearing. It was a situation where mom had two children. Mom was a Sunday school teacher, dad was a firefighter. They were the epitome of good parents. They came into my office, and I remember thinking, why is this happening to you? Because there was nothing. There was no drug abuse. There was no nothing going on in the house. And you could tell that by, you could tell that by the family, right? There was no allegation that anything long term was going on. What happened was the little girl was getting dressed. She was maybe 2 or 3. And I remember she walked right into my office, and she took a header into the corner of my desk, like bam, right like that. And she just walked on as if it was nothing. She was a tough little girl. Mom was playing a game with her, trying to get her dressed. 1, 2, 3, toss on the bed. And she did that a few times as they're getting ready in the morning. Little girl's arm got caught underneath her. And she whimpers a little bit, but she doesn't cry. And everything seems to be okay. The next day, she seems to be favoring it. So they take her to the doctor. They don't find anything wrong. They end up running additional sort of x-rays that go above and beyond what is typically done. And they find a spiral break. And the doctor did not opine that mom took her arm and twisted it, but that it got twisted underneath her as they were playing this game. But because of the state law at the time, he was required to report it to CPS because it was a bone break and he was a physician. Now, I'm going to stop. Reporting requirements are different in different states and your mileage may vary. For instance, in the state of Indiana, everyone is what we call a mandatory reporter. If you have reason to suspect child abuse or neglect has happened, you, no matter who you are, must report it to the police, to CPS, either or. There's a hotline you can call, but you have to do it. If you don't, that is a B misdemeanor. Everyone is a mandated reporter in the state of Indiana. In other states, it's different. I believe Kentucky has that same standard, but I will update you in the course. In other states, it's only certain categories of people. Teachers, physicians, and film developers come to mind. Those are usually statutory categories. Think a minute as to why a film developer in a Walgreens in Alabama might be pressed with reporting this. And I don't know that Alabama is one of those states, but they're scattered all over. But that's a particular category that may be a mandatory reporter. In many states, it's everyone. In other states, it's just certain categories of people must report child abuse or potentially face criminal consequences. In 10 years as a prosecutor, I never saw one of those cases prosecuted because they're really super hard to prove, but those laws exist and you should know about them. So we go to an administrative hearing. So here's how DCS differs, and you will need to know this for the bar. Most bar exams will test you on administrative law, and it is a practice. If you want to be an administrative lawyer, that is a niche profession, and it's pretty rare. Not a lot of people do a lot of administrative law. Because how are those laws made? Okay. For regular old statutory law, the legislature has the process you're all familiar with from Schoolhouse Rock, how a bill becomes a law. Yeah, that's how we do it in the code, the criminal code, the civil code, all of that stuff. That is not how administrative agencies make their law. If you're taking the bar in Indiana, this is a huge topic. It is a topic on many bar exams. Administrative law is completely separate from that process. The legislature creates an administrative agency like DCS. So they'll create the DCS by statute, and then by statute give the administrative agency power to create their own administrative regulations. Now, some administrative regulations can even be quasi-criminal in nature. They can be like infractions. They can be fine-related things, like code enforcement is essentially administrative. But the legislature gives them this power to create their own administrative code. In Indiana and in many states, there is a then broader law that covers how administrative agencies must operate, how they have to make their laws, how they have to publish what they're going to publish in the administrative code and things like that. But I remember in law school, this was never spelled out for me, that it is an entirely separate process and an entirely separate section of the law that is published separately from the code. DCS is bound by both the criminal law and the administrative law. And so I remember taking this particular case with a firefighter and a Sunday school teacher to an administrative hearing. So with all of these administrative agencies, whether they are on the state level or on the federal level, very frequently you need to have an administrative hearing before you go to court, or in lieu of going to court, depending on what you are. The EEOC is an example of that. So if you have an employment issue, a labor issue, you might go to an administrative hearing before you go to court, or it may be resolved at that level and you may not go to court, depending. DCS is the same way. So there can be an administrative hearing overseen by some sort of judicial figure. It can be a magistrate, it can be an administrative law judge. It depends on the state, and that's all going to be in your state's administrative code. That's probably far afield for any bar exam. But you have this arbiter, this administrative, it's something less than or different from a judge, but it's a person who then oversees this administrative hearing. And I got into the administrative hearing and I had researched, because I didn't know any better, the code. Meanwhile, the DCS agent only had the administrative regulations in front of her. The code said it is not child abuse if it's an accident. Essentially said accidents happen. Well, the administrative regulations didn't mention anything about accidents at all. So I'm asking all these questions about, was it an accident? And the caseworker says, well, I didn't ask or care. And I said, why? She said, because the regulations that we follow doesn't have anything in it about an accident. And my questioning to her became pretty pointed at that point. So anytime a kid breaks his arm, someone's getting a case, someone's getting a DCS case. I'll stop for a minute again. DCS gets reports of abuse, and then they do their own investigation, which is different from a criminal, completely separate from a criminal investigation. They can share files with criminal agencies if it's a criminal issue as well. This was never a crime. The police were never involved. They were never charged with anything. I don't know if they were even investigated for it, but this never rose to the level of a crime. So the police were not involved. But it made a difference to the administrative law judge that this was an accident. Made a difference to me, especially like I look on it later, 20 years later, and I'm like, if my kid accidentally broke his arm, that doesn't mean I should be a child abuser. Here's how DCS works in that aspect. DCS takes a complaint and they do their own investigation based off of their administrative regulations. Then they have 3 different outcomes. The allegation can be founded, unfounded, or inconclusive. And those have the regular standard meanings. So this founded allegation, if there's a founded allegation, then DCS can ask the parent to do certain things. Now, DCS, except in huge cases, like cases of clearly criminal conduct, doesn't typically remove children. They can, but in certain circumstances, that founded allegation doesn't mean a whole lot. It's a recommendation. It can come with a recommendation from DCS, and it can be used against someone, say, in a custody lawsuit later on, okay? But in an unfounded allegation, nothing happens. And in fact, most states have provisions that unfounded allegations are purged or are secret, because if it's an unfounded allegation, you didn't do anything wrong, why should that ever be used against you, okay? So we're at that hearing to determine whether or not this is a founded, unfounded, or we don't know, allegation of child abuse. And I'm asking all these questions about accident, and they're refusing to understand. And the administrative law judge pipes in and is like, why would you not inquire? They clearly on our side. I remember we broke for lunch, and the DCS attorney got like mean girl on me. Like they were at another table, and you could see them like laughing, like, oh, because I was a law student at the time. I was in family law clinic, and she was all, she thinks she knows what she's doing. Well, I won that case, and I won that case because I looked at the criminal law, which the court has to keep in the back of their mind, because the court is saying, first of all, if the criminal law is requiring me to look into whether this is an accident, shouldn't I do so in this DCS hearing, which is not criminal in nature, but you can end up having a founded allegation of child abuse against you, which can be used against you relative to your children later. And that's different from just losing a civil case. Like there's a stigma attached to that. So the court was very concerned with that. That's how DCS works. Some of you may have had involvement with CPS or DCS in other areas of your life, or know people who have. And typically DCS, sometimes people think they have a lot of power. Sometimes people think they don't have any power at all. And it really depends on what's going on in your particular case, right? But you need to know that they have administrative regulations that they follow. And then there's also civil law and criminal law that come along on top of that as well. That is where we're going to end this. I'm going to pick it up again because we're just getting a little bit long for the buffer with the other topics for families in the state.